In the summer of 2007, in the brush country of South Texas, a young woman named Giovanna Benitez drove a fence line that her father had bought with everything he owned, and everything he owned was what remained after he lost his wife and his youngest son. She drove it every morning. Before the heat set in, before the mesquite shadows shrank to nothing, she was out on the dirt track that circled the ranch, checking water troughs, counting cattle, looking for fence breaks. She had not grown up doing this. She had not been trained for it. But every morning she came out because the land was not a business. It was the last promise her father had made to her mother. The ranchers on the neighboring properties saw her. They saw the truck kicking dust along the fence. At dawn, they saw the father. To an older man working in the pens with the posture of someone who had rebuilt himself from the inside out. They were not ranching people, the Benitez family. Everyone on that road knew it. The father had been a businessman. The daughter was learning as she went. Nobody said anything unkind, but nobody expected them to last. That summer, 7 doors were about to close on them. What opened after that, nobody on that road saw coming if stories of family promises, land bought with grief, and the kind of stubbornness that turns loss into legacy mean something to you. Subscribe and stay with us. Tell us where you're watching from. We read everyone. In 1999, Giovanna's mother and younger brother were killed in an accident. The details do not belong in this story. What belongs is what happened after. Jesus Armando Benitez, Giovanna's father, had built a business from nothing. It was not large, but it was his, earned by years of work in South Texas, where nothing comes easy and nothing comes free. His wife had carried a dream with her every day of their marriage. A ranch, not a sprawling operation, just land and cattle and sky, a place where the family could live from the ground up. She talked about it the way some people talk about places they have already been with certainty, as if the land were waiting for her. She never saw it. In 2002, 3 years after the accident, Jesus Armando sold the business, all of it. Every asset, every account, every piece of what he had spent his working life assembling. He took the money and bought a piece of ranch land in the South Texas brush country dry. Mesquite-choked, hot 9 months of the year, the kind of land where water is the first conversation and the last. He did not take out a loan. He did not find a partner. He put everything into the dirt. It was not a financial decision. It was a promise kept for a woman who was no longer alive to hear it. He started with row crops. Giovanna was beside him. She watched him wake before dawn and work until the light failed, learning a language he had never spoken before: soil, weather, seasons, the grammar of growing things. The brush country did not care about grief. It cared about water and timing and whether you understood that the land owed you nothing. By 2007, the row crops were not enough. The soil was too dry, the irrigation too expensive, the margins too thin. Father and daughter looked at each other across the kitchen table and made a decision that would cost them nearly everything they had left. They would transition to cattle. Cattle meant new fences, new feed costs, new knowledge. It meant starting over on land they were still learning to read, with money they had already spent once. But it also meant matching the land to what it wanted to grow, and brush country has grown cattle longer than it has grown anything else. They did not know, that summer, how many doors were about to close. Jesus Armando never explained why he kept going. He was not a man who narrated his own decisions, but Giovanna watched him, the way children watch parents who are rebuilding carefully. Without asking, storing everything, he taught her one thing without saying it. When the row crops underperformed, he did not complain. When the irrigation bills came in higher than the harvest was worth, he did not blame the land. He adjusted, he studied, he asked the feed store owner questions that a lifelong rancher would have known at 15. He was not embarrassed by what he did not know. He was only embarrassed by the idea of stopping on the nights when the numbers did not work, and there were many. He sat across from Giovanna at the kitchen table and said the same 5 words. "We will get through this." Not a plan, not a strategy, a decision dressed in patience. The neighbors on the road saw it differently. "They're good people," one rancher said to another at the co-op. Not unkindly, but brush country doesn't wait for you to figure it out. You either come in knowing cattle or you've come in losing money. They came in losing money. The father sold a business to buy a ranch he'd never run. That's not courage, that's arithmetic going the wrong direction. 7 years on that land and they're still learning. Most operations that don't turn a corner by year 5 don't turn one at all. They were not wrong. The arithmetic was going the wrong direction, but arithmetic does not account for promises made to the dead. The transition to cattle began in the summer of 2007. Fencing, feed, water infrastructure, veterinary costs that did not exist when the land grew row crops. Every dollar came from the same finite well, the proceeds of a business sold 5 years earlier, already thinned by years of learning. The first year with cattle was education paid in full price. Giovanna and her father learned which pastures held grass through September and which turned to dust by July. They learned that a water trough left unchecked for 2 days in August heat could mean losing an animal. They learned that brush country cattle need breeds built for the climate, not the catalog breeds that look good on paper and wilt in the sun. Then the financial pressure arrived, not gradually. All at once, the way bills arrive when the income stops matching the expenses. They went to a bank. Giovanna sat across a desk from a loan officer and presented a plan: operating capital to stabilize the herd, repair fencing, carry them through until the cattle operation could sustain itself. The loan officer reviewed the file. No agricultural credit history, no generational ranching background, first-time cattle operation on marginal land. No, they went to a second bank. Same file, same questions, same answer, a third, a fourth. Each time the conversation was polite, the rejection professional, and the drive home quieter than the one before. 5, 6, 7 banks, 7 offices, 7 loan officers who looked at the numbers, saw risk where a family saw a promise, and said the same word in 7 slightly different ways. On the drive home from the 7th, Giovanna stopped at a feed store to pick up supplement for the herd. A rancher she knew only by sight was loading bags into his truck. He asked how things were going. She told him, not everything, just enough. The banks, the rejections, the feeling of doors closing in sequence. He listened. Then he said 3 words. Have you tried FFA across South Texas and the ranching counties that bordered it? First-generation operations folded every year, not because the people were lazy or foolish, because the system was not built for them. Banks measured risk by history. How long have you ranched? How long did your father ranch? How long did his father? If the answer was never, you were not a customer. You were a liability. A family east of Uvalde, immigrants, cattle for the first time lost their operation in the 3rd year. The herd was healthy. The land was adequate. The financing was not. They sold at auction and moved to San Antonio. A couple near Laredo borrowed from relatives, made it through 2 droughts, and lost the ranch to a medical bill that arrived the same month a calf crop came in. Short. The pattern was efficient and merciless. Start without history, borrow without credit, fail without recourse, and Giovanna was standing in the middle of that pattern. 7 banks had said no. The ranch bought with a dead woman's dream, and a sold business was running on fumes. Feed bills arriving, fencing rotting in sections, cattle needing veterinary care that cost money they no longer had. The kitchen table where Jesus Armando said, "We will get through." This was getting quieter each evening. The words were the same. The voice behind them was thinner. Giovanna drove home from the feed store with 3 words sitting in the passenger seat, like something fragile she was afraid to examine too closely. She did not tell her father that night. She sat at the kitchen table after he went to bed, opened a laptop, and searched. They did not say no. They did not say yes immediately. No program does. But they came to the ranch. They walked the fence line the way Giovanna walked it every morning, slowly, looking at the land and the cattle and the infrastructure with the eyes of people who had seen operations like this before. Operations that banks refused, operations that worked anyway. They asked one question that no bank had asked: what do you need to make this work? Not what is your credit history, not what is your collateral, what do you need? The loan was approved, not large, but enough. Enough to buy feed through the dry months, enough to repair the fencing, enough to breathe. Giovanna said it plainly years later. They gave us something invaluable: time to recover and restructure instead of being forced to liquidate. Time, the one thing 7 banks did not sell. Giovanna did not stop there. She enrolled in the ranch management program at Texas Christian University, book knowledge meeting the street knowledge her father had earned in sweat. The ranch stabilized, then it grew, then it stood on its own. Today, the Benitez ranch no longer carries an FSA loan, the debt is paid, the herd is healthy, the land that 7 institutions deemed too risky is self-sustaining. 7 banks never called back, no letter, no follow-up, no loan officer drove out to see what had become of the file they had closed. The silence from those 7 offices was complete. The silence of institutions that measure everything except the one thing that mattered. A promise kept. The story reached Usta not as news but as evidence. Evidence that the safety net works when someone knows it exists. Giovanna became a voice for first-generation ranchers, for women in cattle country, for families that the banking system filed under risk and forgot. She did not campaign, she did not start a foundation. She simply told the truth when asked about the 7 banks, the feed store parking lot, the 3 words that redirected everything. The rancher who said those words never knew what he saved. He was loading feed bags into his truck on an ordinary afternoon, and he mentioned a program the way neighbors mention things without agenda, without follow-up, without knowing that a single sentence can hold a promise together when 7 institutions could not. Other families in South Texas heard the story. Some called F-say, not many but enough. Each call was a door opening for someone who had been told, politely and professionally, that no doors remained. Wendell Berry once wrote, "It is not from ourselves that we learn to be better than we are." Jesus Armando did not learn ranching from his past. He learned it from the land, from his daughter, and from a stranger in a parking lot who saw a neighbor instead of a number. Some doors close because they were never yours. The door that matters is often the one a stranger points to with 3 words and a kindness that needs no reason. 7 banks saw numbers. 1 farmer saw neighbors. That made all the difference. Has a stranger ever changed your life with a single sentence? Tell us in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from tonight. You never know who might be listening. Subscribe and we will see you next week.